I've seen enough. Proceed with the plan.
Rose Cabot spent her whole life standing up to men who thought they could order her around. So when she met Vincent Slater, the most feared mob boss in Denver, she did what no one else had the nerve to do. She defied him. In front of everyone. He could have destroyed her, but instead, he became obsessed with the only woman who didn't tremble before him. Between taunts, dangerous looks, and a kiss that changed everything, Rose began to discover the man behind the monster. But loving Vincent Slater meant stepping into a world she might never be able to leave. Chapter 1: The Name No One Refuses. The envelope was sitting on my desk when I walked into the office, and I knew, before I even touched it, that some part of my day had just turned upside down. Cream-colored paper, a dark wax seal, with a dry, almost mineral scent. No printed return address, just a single initial pressed into the relief, S. Gwen was leaning against the doorframe with an enormous mug in both hands, pretending she hadn't been waiting all morning for this exact moment. She'd been my best friend since we were 22, and when she went quiet, it meant the subject was too big for jokes. "That came by courier at 7:30, she said softly. "I signed the receipt in your handwriting. You're welcome." I looked at the envelope for one more second before sitting down. I hung my bag on the back of the chair, poured myself some water. Everything slow, because every postponed gesture was a gesture I still controlled. You know what it is, Rose. You know who it's from. I know the last name. I don't know what he wants. He wants you organizing his charity gala in 3 months. Gwen came in, shut the door behind her, and sat in the client chair as if I'd already opened the envelope. That's what leaked last night. Half of Denver's luxury scene lost sleep over it. I broke the seal. The words inside the paper were dry, formal, written by someone who didn't waste time on courtesy. Name of the event, date, fee, time of the initial meeting. The fee was the kind of number that paid 2 years of office rent. The meeting was that very afternoon. "I'm not going," I said, and I heard my own voice as if it belonged to someone else. "On principle." "You're going." Gwen was smiling, but it was a worried smile. "On principle, too. Because you've never turned down a job because of the client, and I don't want this to be the year that changes. The client is Vincent Slater. The client is a check, honey. Vincent Slater is the name that comes free with it." I laughed in spite of myself. It was enough for her to know she'd won. I grew up listening to my father shout in the kitchen of a house that looked pretty from the outside. I learned early that men with loud voices weren't strong men, just men who'd figured out no one would stop them. At 15, on my bedroom floor, I swore I would never bow to a single one of them. Vincent Slater, from what I knew, was exactly the kind of man the whole city bowed to without ever being asked, and that, deep down, was why I'd already decided to accept. I went out with Gwen to the cafe on the corner because I needed the noise of other people talking to think straight. The neighborhood was waking up slowly on that cool Denver morning, a dry wind coming down off the mountains and scraping the sidewalk, the smell of stone and roasted coffee drifting out through open doors. I ordered a double espresso. Gwen ordered a cappuccino with cinnamon and said, at the counter, that if I died by the end of the month, she wanted my couch. Deal. And the plant by the window. The plant's already dead. Gwen. Exactly. I can pretend I killed it. We walked back to the office, cups in hand. I stared at the storefronts without seeing anything, looking for an answer no one was going to write there. My entire adult life had been built on the idea of owing no one anything, and in 4 hours, I'd be sitting across from the man best known for collecting on everything. I called to confirm the meeting. The voice on the other end belonged to an assistant who treated every word as if it were expensive. Address, floor, time, the name of the guard who would receive me. I hung up and stared at the phone longer than I should have, the screen fading slowly until it went black. "I'm going," I said, finally, to the empty room. Gwen heard from the hallway. "I know. Wear the black dress. The one that makes it look like you're in charge of something." The Slater building took up an entire block of the financial district, a dark glass tower that reflected the sky as if it wanted to devour it. The Uber dropped me at the side entrance. I climbed the short steps into the gray marble lobby with its low lighting and that specific silence of places too expensive to have an echo. And I gave my name to the man in the suit who looked first at my shoes, then at my face, and lastly at a tablet where I was probably already marked. "You can go up, Miss Cabot, penthouse." I rode the elevator alone. I pressed the top button. The mirrored door reflected a woman with her hair pinned up, a black dress that stopped at the knee, dark lipstick, and an expression I hadn't planned. It was the expression of someone about to do something irreversible and not yet knowing its name. I arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled time and sat another 10 on the sofa in the anteroom, on purpose, observing the office from the outside, the assistant typing without looking at the keyboard, the walls without paintings, the white flowers in a tall vase. No one had asked to exist there, but that existed with surgical precision. I declined the coffee the assistant offered twice. When the wall clock struck the exact hour, I stood without hurry and went to the door. The assistant looked at me. "You can go in." I was already going in. The office was large, but it didn't show off. High ceilings, windows that took up an entire wall, a view of the mountain range in the distance, cut against the deep blue of the afternoon. The smell was of new paper and dark wood, with some note of leather coming from the armchairs in the corner. Vincent Slater was behind a wide desk, reading something, and he didn't stand when I came in. He didn't even look up. He just turned a page with his thumb and kept reading. I didn't ask permission either. I crossed the room, pulled out the chair in front of the desk, and sat. He turned another page. Miss Cabot. His voice was lower than I expected, and cleaner. It had no drama. It had only the certainty of a man who knew he'd be heard. "Mr. Slater, you arrived on time." I arrived 10 minutes early, and sat outside for 10 minutes. I don't like being too punctual. That was when he finally looked up. His eyes were dark gray, the kind of eyes that looked like two periods at the end of a sentence, and they looked at me as if I'd just done something interesting. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just took note. "Good to know," he said, and pushed the contract toward my side of the desk. It was a thick contract, bound, with discreet tabs where I was supposed to sign. I began reading calmly. He stayed where he was, not openly watching me, but not hiding it either. I could feel the weight of his eyes resting somewhere between my lap and the corner of my mouth, and I had the exact impression that he was waiting for me to make some gesture too small for anyone else to notice. I didn't. I reached Clause 7 and stopped. "This part is wrong." He didn't answer. Clause 7. I looked up. The contracted party cedes to the contracting party all rights of image, recording, publication, and archiving of the event, and of the person herself, for an indefinite term. I don't cede my image indefinitely to anyone. You rewrite it, or I leave. There was a silence that lasted 3 seconds longer than silences usually last. The kind of silence that normally precedes a disagreement. It didn't precede one. "Rewrite it," he said slowly. "Rewrite it." He took a pen from the drawer without taking his eyes off my face. He struck out the clause with a single line, wrote 3 words in the margin in firm handwriting, and signed beside it. The line was so straight it looked drawn with a ruler. The 3 words were exactly what I would have asked for. Duration of event. He handed the contract back. "Read it again." I read it. It was perfect. "Sign at the end," he said. "I'm reading the rest." "Go ahead." I kept reading. Not because I distrusted him, but because I wasn't going to sign anything in front of that man before I was certain every word had been seen with my own eyes. It took me 7 minutes. He didn't move once. At some point he picked up a glass of water, drank half of it slowly, set it back down without a sound. That was the only movement. When I signed, I handed the contract back with both hands, the way you hand over something that matters. "Thank you for accepting the change. You would have left." I would have. One corner of his mouth lifted. It wasn't a smile. It was the shadow of one. "Good to know," he said again. I stood. I took my bag from the back of the chair. When I reached the door, I turned half a step. "The first prep meeting is next Monday, at the Brown Palace. I sent the calendar to your office. I'll be there." "On time?" It was his turn to look at me with the shadow of a smile again. "Maybe 10 minutes late." I left. I walked to the elevator without looking back. I pressed the button. I waited with my shoulders straight, and my breath steady, as if someone might still be watching me through the dark glass of the door. When the doors closed and the elevator began to descend, I rested my forehead against the cold mirror and shut my eyes for 2 seconds. The metal was icy against my skin. I hadn't trembled in there. I hadn't looked away. I hadn't said please. And yet, somewhere in my chest, something had stirred. Not fear. I knew very well what fear was. It was something else, quieter, more inconvenient, and I wasn't going to give it a name there, inside an elevator in his building, with the reflection of my own expression looking back at me without an answer. I got to the office almost at nightfall. The sky outside had turned dark orange over the rooftops, and Gwen was waiting for me with 2 glasses of wine, already poured on the meeting table, the lights low, the air smelling of the candle she always lit when something needed to be processed out loud. "Tell me everything," There's not much to tell. Professional liar. Sit. I sat. I took a sip. I told her without the details, the way you tell something you don't quite understand yet. Clause 7, 3 words in the margin. His pen, the corner of his mouth. Gwen listened in silence. At the end, she set her glass on the table. You corrected Vincent Slater. It wasn't a question. I corrected a contract. You corrected Vincent Slater. I didn't answer. And somewhere in that dark glass penthouse, on the other side of downtown Denver, a man who didn't look up for almost anyone kept staring at the door I'd just walked out of. I didn't know that yet, but I would soon. That night, before I fell asleep, I got an email from his office. It was the confirmation of Monday's meeting at the Brown Palace. At the end of the text, on a single line, with no signature, someone had written, Mr. Slater asked us to inform you that he will arrive on time. I closed the phone. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the city outside making that low, constant Denver sound at night, half wind, half engine, half something that has no name. And I laughed to myself in the dark of my room, for a reason I couldn't explain even to myself. Chapter 2. No one crosses him. The Brown Palace had that yellow light of an old hotel that made any woman look prettier and any lie sound more convincing. I arrived 10 minutes early, my team behind me carrying clipboards, fabric swatches, and 3 boxes of glasses for the table test. The smaller ballroom smelled of waxed wood and coffee that had been kept warm too long, and the chandeliers overhead threw golden shadows on the walls that made me understand why the place still charged what it charged. The meeting was on the 2nd floor. I climbed the curved staircase without looking at my watch, because I already knew he'd arrive on time, and I didn't want to be looking at the door when he walked in. I was wrong about that last part. When Vincent crossed the ballroom's entrance, everyone on my team stopped talking at the same time, and the pause was so idiotic that I turned my face to the door without realizing it. He came in with 2 men behind him. One of them I recognized from the few records I'd managed to dig up over the weekend. Victor Quaid, his right hand, the face of a man who slept little and liked his life that way. The other was an older gentleman, gray suit, almost invisible glasses, who I suspected was Arthur Bishop. Vincent's lawyer's name had come up twice in my research. Vincent swept his gaze over the ballroom like someone surveying a room before occupying it. When his eyes met mine, the shadow of last week's smile came back for half a second. Then it vanished. Miss Cabot, Mr. Slater. On time, I saw. There was a short laugh from my team. I cut it off with a look. Vincent didn't. He looked toward the sound. No reaction on his face, like someone making a note of something. We sat. The lighting vendor opened the slide. The event coordinator went over the schedule. The chef held forth on the menu with the patience of someone who considered himself the main event. I stepped in when I needed to, took notes in silence when I didn't. Vincent listened without moving a muscle in his face, and on 3 occasions he asked short, so exact questions that cut away half of what was being said. Each of his questions landed at the precise moment when the silence had grown heavy enough for the presenter to realize he was stretching out what he shouldn't. That was when the lighting designer got to the floor plan of the ballroom. Here, the central runway, 4 meters wide, 3.5, Vincent said, without taking his eyes off the plan. There was a moment when no one answered. I looked at the plan. I looked at the lighting designer, who had gone pale. I looked at Victor, who was deliberately not looking at anyone. 4 meters, I said. The room froze. Vincent slowly raised his eyes from the plan. And excuse me, 4 meters. You're looking at last year's plan, which was made for the larger ballroom. This room has 12 meters of usable width. A 3.5-meter runway leaves the side tables less than 2 meters away, which violates the fire code. 4 meters centers the flow and still allows service from the sides. I measured it. Friday. The silence lasted long enough for me to hear the air conditioning. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Victor bring his knuckle to his mouth, scratch the corner of his lip with a care that might have been only care, might have been something else. Vincent looked at the plan one more time, then at me, and he smiled. It wasn't the shadow of a smile from the previous meeting. It was a small smile, closed, no teeth, but it was a real smile, and it was so out of place that half the room shifted in their chairs without knowing why. I felt the impact of it in my chest before I could defend myself. 4 meters, he said. Note it. The lighting designer wrote it down so fast he tore the page. The meeting went on. We settled catering, security, the guest list, the reception, authorized journalists. Each time I spoke, Vincent listened without turning his face toward me. but I felt his focus the way you feel someone breathing very close to the back of your neck. It wasn't invasive, it was attentive. And that was exactly what bothered me. I wasn't used to being listened to like that. Not by someone who had reason not to listen. When we finished, it was almost 8 at night. The light in the ballroom had grown warmer with the darkness outside, and the smell of old coffee had been replaced by the subtle perfume of the flowers in the center of the tables, which I'd asked to keep as a visual reference for the day of the event. The team filtered out little by little. Vincent stayed in the ballroom until the last vendor left, which I took as politeness until I understood that he was waiting for me to finish packing up too. Victor passed me in the hallway on the way to the elevator. "Miss Cabot, Mr. Quaid, you corrected the boss." I corrected a floor plan. Same thing. "No." He looked at me a second longer than I expected. He had the look of a man who read people the way others read the newspaper, without hurry and without asking first. "Good night, Miss Cabot." "Good night, Mr. Quaid." When I came back to the ballroom, Vincent was still there, standing by the table, jacket in his hands. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the window facing the street, his chin raised just enough to see the reflection of the room itself in the glass. The light from outside drew the lines of his profile with a clarity that seemed calculated, but I knew it wasn't. It was just the city doing what the city does to men who've learned to wait. "I'll take you home," he said. Before I could say anything, I drove. "Your car will go to your house without you. I already told the valet." I raised an eyebrow. Without asking, he turned and looked at me for the first time since he'd smiled. "You would have said no." "I can say no now." "You can." He waited. I wanted to say no just to prove I could. And that was exactly what made me realize that saying no, in that moment, would be more about me than about him. I picked up my bag. I went to the door. "Let's go." The car was black, low, the kind that looks like it's from a movie until the door closes and you realize the silence inside was different, denser, more private, as if the outside stopped existing the moment the latch clicked. The driver nodded a greeting and didn't speak. Vincent sat beside me, in the back seat, with a respectful space between us. He smelled of a woody cologne I couldn't identify, and that lodged in my sense of smell more insistently than I would have liked. We drove 2 blocks in silence. "You read?" he said, out of nowhere. Most people read. Most people don't measure a ballroom on Friday for a Monday meeting. Most people don't correct Vincent Slater. No, it was a single syllable, and it had humor inside it. They don't correct. I looked at him. His face was turned to the window, hard profile against the streetlight. And there was a discreet tiredness under his eyes I hadn't noticed at the office. The kind of tiredness that doesn't come from one bad night's sleep, but from whole years carried in the same place. "What do you read?" I asked. "Poetry, mostly." "Seriously?" "Russian." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Why is that funny?" "Because it's exactly the kind of thing a man like you would say to seem interesting, and at the same time it's the kind of thing too specific to be made up." He looked at me then, slowly. And there was an attention in that gesture that made it hard to hold his gaze for long. "You think I need to seem interesting? I think you never needed to, and that's exactly why you managed it." The silence that followed was the kind that makes both people know one more sentence would change something, and they both pull back at the same time. He asked me where I was from. I answered. He asked how long I'd lived alone. I said since I was 19. He didn't comment. He just stored the information in the same place where he'd stored the corner of my lip the week before. "You don't ask anything," he said, after a minute. "I do ask." "Ask now." I thought. I had 1,000 questions. I asked none of the ones that mattered. "Why did you smile today? At the meeting?" "Because you were right." "Do you smile every time someone is right?" "You were the first." I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. I looked out, at the city lights passing fast on the other side of the glass, and I felt the weight of his sentence settle slowly in my chest like something I hadn't asked to receive. The car stopped a block before my building. I recognized the corner before I understood why. I looked at Vincent. "This is wrong." "It's right. My building is the next one." "I know." "Then why here?" He looked at me with the patience of someone who'd already thought it through before I even got in the car. "Because you won't want to explain to your building's doorman where you're coming from. Not today. Not in the coming weeks. If we stop at the door, someone takes note. If we stop a block away, no one took note of anything." I stayed quiet. It was the most considerate thing a man had ever done without asking my permission, and at the same time it was exactly the kind of thing that made me want to open the door without thanking him. I opened the door without thanking him. "Good night, Mr. Slater." "Good night, Miss Cabot." I got out. I shut the door harder than I needed to. I walked to my building without looking back. I I climbed the 2 steps at the entrance, took the key from my bag, opened the glass door, stepped into the lobby. That was when, without thinking, I looked through the side window. His car was still there, stopped, lights on, in the same place where it had pulled over, a block from my door, waiting. I stood motionless in the middle of the lobby for 3 seconds. The doorman greeted me. I didn't hear him. I looked through the window again. The car was still there. It waited what felt like an eternity, but it must have been 20 seconds, at most. It waited the time it would take me to get into the elevator, ride up to my floor, open my apartment door, turn on the light. It waited for me to get inside safely. Only then did the taillights move, and the car disappeared around the corner. I stayed where I was in the lobby. Miss Cabot, is everything all right? Everything's fine. Good night. Good night. I rode the elevator up, looking at my own reflection. The woman in the mirror had her hair a little looser than it had been at the start of the afternoon. The lipstick had faded at the corners. Her eyes were too wide for the hour. I went into the apartment. I turned on the living room light. The yellow glare hit the white walls and reminded me, for some reason I couldn't name, of the brown palace. I tossed my bag on the couch. I went to the window and looked at the corner, more out of habit than hope. It was empty. I sat on the windowsill. I took off my shoes. I looked at the ceiling, and I understood, right there, alone in my own silence, something I still didn't know how to name. Vincent Slater hadn't driven me home because he wanted to impress me. He hadn't stopped a block early to protect himself. He'd stopped a block early to protect me. He'd waited for me to turn on the light because, in the world he lived in, women sometimes didn't turn it on. I'd never been cared for like that. Not by my father. Least of all by my father. And the discomfort of discovering that I liked it was greater than the discomfort of discovering who he was. I went to the kitchen. I poured water. I drank it standing, leaning against the counter, listening to the apartment make the sounds that only empty apartments make at night. The pipe settling, the refrigerator breathing, the silence between one thing and the next. I thought about calling Gwen and didn't. I thought about texting him and laughed at the idea. I thought about all the times I'd said that never, ever, no man. And I laughed to myself again, in the dark of my kitchen. It was the second time in a week. Chapter 3. The house no one was supposed to see. Friday started off wrong because I woke up thinking about him. Not about the contract, not about the 4-meter runway, not about the brown palace or the car parked in front of my building until the living room light came on. I thought about him the way you think about someone you still haven't decided whether you want close. I got up irritated with myself, made coffee that was too strong, burned my tongue on purpose, and went to the office swearing I would treat Vincent Slater like any other client. It lasted until 3 in the afternoon, when my phone rang and his name appeared on the screen. "I need you in the car in 15 minutes, he said, without a greeting. "Good afternoon to you too." "I don't have time right now, Rose. It's called manners, Vincent." There was a pause on the other end, the kind I was already learning to interpret. A short pause meant he was handling 2 matters at once. A long pause meant I'd managed to pull his attention away from the whole world just for me. This one was short. 15 minutes. Take the side door. I'll explain on the way. I'm not going anywhere without knowing where. Yes, you are. And he hung up. I stared at the phone as if it had cursed at me. Gwen walked past the office door with a stack of estimates in her arm, looked at my face, and stopped. "Who died?" "No one yet," I answered, grabbing my bag. "But there's a man testing his luck." Gwen smiled in that way of hers, without showing her teeth. "Send my name to the police if you disappear." I went down the side door because it was faster, not because he'd told me to. It was important to keep that distinction for myself. The black car was already at the corner, the driver standing, his suit impeccable despite the heat. Vincent opened the door from inside without getting out. I got in, closed it, and crossed my legs harder than I needed to. "Where to?" "The suburbs. 40 minutes. I have an appointment at 6. "You had one," he corrected, without looking at me. I already handled it with Gwen. I turned my head slowly. "You called my business partner before you called me. I called your partner after you hung up on me. I didn't hang up. You hung up." Detail. The driver merged into traffic on Spear without saying a word, and I breathed through my nose to keep from saying what was on the tip of my tongue. Vincent was in a dark suit with no tie, 2 buttons open, the expensive watch heavy on his wrist. There was a new tiredness in him I hadn't seen the week before, something faint around the eyes. "Vincent. Where are we going?" He finally turned his face to me. His eyes had that thing I still didn't know how to name, a kind of care disguised as impatience. I need to handle a family emergency, and the schedule doesn't allow me to drop you off first. I thought about taking you back to the office, calculated the traffic. It doesn't work. So you're coming with me. You wait 20 minutes in a room that isn't my office, and then I'll take you wherever you need to go. I can wait at a gas station. You're not going to wait at a gas station. Vincent. Rose. He said my name the way he'd deliver a verdict. It's not up for discussion. I should have fought. It was exactly the kind of sentence that made me climb the walls, the kind of tone my father used in the kitchen on Sundays, when someone dared to disagree with his newspaper. But there was a difference I was still learning to recognize. My father said it wanting to silence me. Vincent said it wanting to protect me from a gas station at 4 p.m. It was the first time I let it slide. 20 minutes, I said. Low, not one more. Deal. We left the city by the 25, took an exit I didn't know, entered a tree-lined neighborhood where the streets had the names of trees, and the houses sat behind low walls without ostentation. It was the kind of place where old money hid. Vincent stopped in front of a white house with large windows and a poorly pruned rosebush out front. No electric fence, no visible cameras, nothing that said someone important lived there. He got out first and opened my door before the driver could reach it. It was a small gesture, automatic, the kind he probably did without thinking. I got out and he rested his hand on my waist for half a second to guide me over the step. Half a second. I felt the warmth of his palm through the fabric of my dress, as if it had lasted an hour. Who lives here? I asked. An older lady. I won't be long. The door opened before he rang the bell. A woman of about 70 appeared in the doorway, a kitchen apron tied over a blue dress, short white hair, dark eyes, a smile that took over her whole face when she saw Vincent. You're late, she said. I know, and you brought someone. I did. She looked me up and down the way only older women do, hiding nothing, and opened the door wider. Come in, dear. I'm Dolores. I went in without quite knowing why. Vincent passed in front of me, gave Dolores's shoulder a light squeeze, and disappeared down a hallway without saying anything else. I stood in the living room looking at the place. An old rug, a velvet sofa worn at the edges, portraits in silver frames on a sideboard. There was an upright piano against the wall with sheet music open on it. It smelled of black tea and cake batter in the oven. There was nothing there that said Mafia. Sit, Dolores said, pointing at the sofa. I'll bring you some tea. You don't look like the sugar type. I'm not. I guessed from your mouth. I laughed in spite of myself. She disappeared into the kitchen and came back 2 minutes later with a tray, 2 cups, a little plate of buttery cookies. She sat in the armchair across from the sofa, folded her hands in her lap, and watched me the way you appraise a new vase in the room. What's your name? Rose. Like the flower. Like the flower. And you work with him. I'm organizing a gala for him. She dipped her cookie in the tea with the precision of someone who'd been doing it for 50 years. And has he been treating you well? The question came so lightly that I almost answered without thinking. He's been trying. Dolores laughed softly, a sound from the throat, contained. That's the most he can manage, dear. Trying. I stayed silent. She bit into the cookie, chewed slowly, looked out the window where the late afternoon light fell at an angle across the garden. It's been a long time since he brought anyone here, she said, without looking at me. Too long. The sentence went into me with the calm of a small knife. It didn't hurt at first. It hurt later. I didn't know what to answer. I set the cup on the saucer and pretended to be looking at the portraits, just so I wouldn't have to look at her. In one of the frames, a boy of about 10 was holding a fish too small for the pride on his face. I swallowed without quite understanding why. Dolores, you don't have to say anything, she cut in gently. Drink your tea. Vincent reappeared in the hallway before I could answer. He'd swapped his jacket for a lighter one, looked less tired, and held a folder he hadn't brought in. He looked at me sitting on the sofa with the cup of tea in my hand, and he paused for a second in the doorway, the same way I'd seen him pause at the door of my office once. You two hit it off, he said, more a statement than a question. We're settling the future of the cookies, Dolores answered. I stood. I set the cup on the tray carefully. I kissed Dolores's cheek because it felt like the right thing to do. Come back, she said in my ear, even if he doesn't bring you. Vincent didn't comment in the car. Neither did I. We drove the first 15 minutes in silence, and I stared at the street without seeing anything, feeling my chest tight in a way I couldn't explain. When he finally spoke, it was in his way, without preamble. I shouldn't have taken you there, but you did. I did. He looked at the street. Don't ask why. I don't know myself, But something made you take me, I insisted. He took a while to answer. The streetlights along Spear were beginning to come on, the sky turning that knife blue color Denver has at the end of the afternoon. You saying you'd wait at a gas station? I looked at him without understanding. If you'd asked to come in, he went on, without turning his face, I would have come back. But you didn't ask. You were just going to wait. And I couldn't leave you at a gas station. I didn't know how to answer that either. I was starting to think there was a lot here I didn't have a ready answer for. There's a gallery event at 9, he said, after a while. Small, acquaintances of mine. I promised I'd show up. I need to go home. I know. I'll take you, but I'd like you to come. Why? He turned his face then, and the yellow light of a lamppost caught half of him. Because I wanted you to. The gallery was in an old building in the historic district, 2 stories with high ceilings, white walls, enormous paintings hung with a respectful space between them. Everything was too understated to be expensive in an ordinary way. Vincent greeted 3 people at the entrance with his right hand, his left hand at the small of my back, the lightest touch, just to tell the others I was with him. I didn't move his hand away. I should have. We walked through one of the side rooms where there were fewer people. He stopped in front of a large, dark painting of a faceless figure bent over an empty table. I stood beside him without saying anything. I don't understand art, he said low. Liar. I don't. I buy whatever makes me stop. And this one made you stop. This one made me stop. I looked at the faceless figure and understood why. I didn't say so. He turned to me and the room got smaller. There was no one else in the corner where we stood. The light from the spotlights fell at an angle, leaving half his face in shadow. I felt, the way you feel thunder before the rain arrives, that if he took one more step I wouldn't retreat. He took the step. His hand rose slowly, stopped in the air an inch from my cheek, waiting, asking without asking. I felt the warmth of his palm before the touch. I felt my own breath grow short. I felt entire weeks of contained provocation run down my neck like hot water. That was when I remembered my father. It wasn't anything specific. It was just an image of my mother in the kitchen, lowering her face for no reason, her chest rising and falling in a breath that wasn't hers. I saw myself from a distance, beside Vincent Slater, with his hand an inch from my face, and my whole head sounded an old alarm, without judging whether it made sense or not. I took a step back. Rose, I need to go. Rose, wait. I didn't wait. I took another step back, then another, then turned and crossed the room walking without running because running would have been worse. Vincent didn't come after me. Maybe he'd understood something I myself still didn't understand, and the possibility hurt even more. I went out the front door, took out my phone, called an Uber. I waited on the sidewalk with my arms crossed. When the car arrived, I got in, gave the address, rested my forehead against the cold glass, and held back the tears because it wasn't time yet. I got home almost at midnight. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was out again. I took the key from my bag. I looked at the door, and the air fled my chest. On the threshold, leaning against the wood, was a white rose. No note. Chapter 4. A Rose, a Warning. The white rose slept in a coffee mug on top of my sink for a whole week. I didn't throw it out. I didn't put it in a decent vase. I didn't ask anyone what it meant, even though something inside me already sensed it, without being able to name it yet. I put it in the mug, changed the water 3 times, and each morning, I looked at it the way you look at a sealed envelope you still haven't decided to open. The petals stayed white, stubborn, as if they too were waiting for something. Vincent didn't call on Thursday. He didn't call on Friday. On Monday, he sent a message about nothing but logistics for the gala schedule. 3 lines, period. I answered with 3 lines, period. It was as if the gallery had never happened, as if the rose weren't on my sink, and I hadn't stood frozen on the threshold of my door for 2 whole minutes before deciding to pick it up. I was grateful for his silence, and wanted to punch him for the very same reason. Saturday came too fast. The Brown Palace had been transformed into the thing we always promise and don't always deliver. A ballroom of polished mirrors, round tables with raw linen cloths, low centerpieces so they wouldn't interrupt conversation, warm lighting in the corners and hot in the center of the dance floor, 300 confirmed guests, philanthropy in 2 languages, champagne. I'd chosen myself after tasting 4. I arrived at 4 in the afternoon in black pants and a functional blouse, still wearing sneakers, clipboard in hand. I ran the team for 6 hours straight without sitting down. I argued with the head chef over the timing of the main course, Won the argument with a spreadsheet and a look he'll remember. I solved a microphone problem with the sound guy in a hurry, 10 minutes before the rehearsal. I posted 2 guards in a service corridor I hadn't requested, and no one could tell me who had authorized. I went up to the room the hotel gave me for long events, 10 minutes before the doors opened. I took off the functional blouse. I put on the long black dress I'd chosen 3 weeks earlier. I let my hair down, pinned it up again more loosely, applied dark lipstick. I looked in the mirror and didn't quite recognize myself, because the rose in the mirror looked like she was waiting for someone. I closed the door behind me harder than I needed to. Vincent arrived at 8:15, 10 minutes after his scheduled time, and exactly 5 minutes after the moment when the ballroom's curiosity began to get interesting. He came in through the main door without an entourage, only Victor 2 steps behind, black suit, black shirt, no tie. The conversation in the ballroom dropped in volume for 3 seconds and came back, like a wave that recedes and decides not to break. He saw me from across the ballroom and stopped walking for half a step. I turned my face away before he could go on. I worked. I smiled at the sponsors. I walked the silent auction curator to the bid table. I helped a judge's wife who wanted to know where the restrooms were. I checked the lighting sequence for the opening speech. I carried out each task on my list with the precision of someone who uses work as armor, and it worked until 10:30 DAO, when I had to go down to the service corridor to sort out a mix-up with the second batch of champagne. That's where he was waiting. I didn't know who he was at that moment. I only knew he was a man of about 30-something, blonde hair combed back, an expensive suit worn badly, glass in hand, leaning against the corridor wall as if he were alone in his own apartment. The corridor smelled of ironed linen and the frying from the floor below, a completely mundane smell that didn't match the way my neck tensed when he watched me approach. When he saw me, he smiled the way men smile when they think a smile is a favor. You're Rose, right? Excuse me. I asked you something, and I gave you leave to step aside. I tried to pass. He moved his shoulder, not much, just enough to take up the whole corridor. His glass smelled of expensive whiskey, and a man who'd had 3 too many. I just wanted to talk. His hand rose and touched my arm, light, with the confidence of someone who'd never been hit in his life. We were never properly introduced. I looked at his hand on my arm, and time did that strange thing of going very slow and very fast at the same time. The touch was exact, unhurried, the kind that pretends to be innocent. Take your hand off. Easy. Take your hand off. Now. He laughed. It was the laugh that scared me, more than the hand. It was the laugh of someone who'd never heard no twice in a row, and didn't intend to start with me. And that was when Vincent appeared at the end of the corridor. I didn't hear his steps. No one ever heard his steps. He was 10 meters away, and suddenly he was 1 meter away, and Lawrence's hand had already left my arm on its own, because even his hand understood before his brain did. Vincent didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't make any gesture, in fact. He simply positioned himself between the two of us with the calm of a door closing, and looked at Lawrence the way he looked at people when he wanted them to leave the room. Hollis. Slater. Lawrence's voice cracked in the middle. I was just talking. You were leaving. I was invited. You were invited to the ballroom, not to the corridor. Silence. I watched Lawrence's Adam's apple rise and fall. Sss. You leave through the side door in the next 2 minutes, Vincent went on, in the same tone, without moving a muscle in his face. You don't speak to anyone on the way. You don't return to any address that has my name on it. Is that clear? Slater. Come on. It was just... Is that clear? Lawrence went pale. Not the way you see in a movie. The way you see when a person's body understands something before the person finishes thinking it. He nodded, lowered his glass, left through the side, escorted by 2 men in suits who appeared without being called, and disappeared with the same discretion. In 20 seconds the corridor was empty. In 30, I remembered to breathe. Vincent didn't touch me. He stood half a step away from me, looking in the direction Lawrence had gone, his jaw locked. There was something in the line of his shoulders that was different from the ballroom, more rigid, like someone holding himself back on purpose. Are you all right? He asked, without turning. I am. Do you need to sit down? No. Do you want to go back to the ballroom? I thought. I looked at the blouse that was still in place, at his hand tucked into the pocket of his jacket because I knew his hand was clenched in there, at the empty corridor where 15 seconds earlier something had nearly begun. I do. We went back the same way. He walked half a step behind, on the left, his shoulder lightly touching mine at every turn. When we entered the ballroom, Nothing had changed. The lights were still warm in the center. The conversations were still loud. The auction curator was smiling at a man with a graying beard. No one had noticed that Lawrence Hollis had come in, and no one was going to notice that he'd left. Vincent left me at the side of the dance floor. He spoke low, without moving his lips. "I'll stay in the corner. You work. When you finish, we go. I can go alone. You can, but you won't." I looked at him. His eyes had that thing from the day at Dolores's house, something that wasn't there when he spoke to anyone else. "Okay," I said. I worked 2 more hours. I closed the auction. I saw off the last guests on the staircase. I went over the next day's pending tasks with the team. When I finally went up to the room to change clothes again, it was 2:15 in the morning, and my feet ached inside the heels. A dull, constant ache I only started to feel when I stopped moving. Vincent waited at the hotel door without going back in. The car was at the corner. I sat in the back seat beside him. The driver took Spear. Denver was quiet in that way the city gets in the small hours of a Saturday, when the bars have closed but the night still won't admit it's over. We stayed silent for a long time. It wasn't a bad silence. It was a silence with weight, like a blanket you lay over someone without asking if they want it. "Vincent, what would you have done if I hadn't been watching?" The question came out before I'd decided to ask it. He turned his face to me slowly. The avenue lights passed across the glass in yellow stripes, hitting his face from below, and for a second he looked almost too human. "I didn't touch him," he answered, just as slowly, "because you were watching." The sentence went into me the way Dolores's sentence had, but deeper. I understood the magnitude of what he was telling me. I understood that he was giving me, as a gift, the confession of a man who'd held his hand back because of what I would think of him. I understood that this, in his world, was the kind of thing a man says once in a lifetime. If that, I should have been afraid. The Rose from the gallery would have felt the cold in her chest and taken a step back. She would have asked him to stop the car. She would have walked. I wasn't afraid. I felt something else. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me for that." "I'm not thanking you for that. I'm thanking you for asking whether I wanted to go back to the ballroom." He looked at me for a time that lasted longer than seconds. He said nothing, but he moved his hand inside his pocket, took it out, and set it open between the two of us on the seat. He didn't take mine. He just left his there, palm up, waiting. I looked at his hand, at the width of his fingers, at the line of his wrist, at the contained tension there, like an argument he wasn't going to make out loud. I thought about my mother in the kitchen. I thought about my father. I thought about the white rose still in the mug on top of the sink. I thought about Dolores saying, "He never brought anyone here." I thought about the gallery, the faceless figure, the inch of air between his palm and my cheek, the step back I'd taken. I put my hand in his. His fingers closed slowly, without squeezing, as if he were afraid of startling an animal, as if he were counting on me to decide whether his stayed there or not. I stayed. The car stopped in front of my building at 3:10. Vincent got out first. The way he got out, came around the car, opened the door. I got out. The air was cold, that dry Denver cold that comes in through your collar and doesn't ask permission. He didn't walk me to the lobby. He waited on the sidewalk, hands behind his back, like a soldier who'd finished his shift but couldn't leave his post. I reached the building door. I turned to look at him. He was still there, motionless under the yellow light of the lamppost. And there was something in that posture, in that waiting without demanding, that I couldn't name but felt in my knees. I climbed the stairs because I needed every step to calm my head. I opened the apartment door. I turned on the living room light. I went to the window, pulled the curtain aside, looked down. The car was still there. Vincent was still on the sidewalk, waiting for the light. I stayed at the window longer than I needed to. I looked at him down below, black suit, hands behind his back, and I realized something that had begun to happen to me weeks earlier, and that I had only managed to name in that second, with the cold pain against my forehead and all of Denver dark behind his back. I'd stopped wanting to run, not from him, not from the Brown Palace meeting, not from Dolores's house, not from the gallery, not from the hotel corridor, not from his open hand on the car seat. I'd stopped wanting to run. When I was with him, something in me stopped running, and that, alone, was already frightening enough that I wasn't going to try to name it yet. I turned on the bedroom light, the way he was waiting to see it. I watched from above as he got into the car, and the car pulled away down the empty street. When the headlights vanished around the corner, I went to the kitchen, picked up the coffee mug with the white rose inside, and changed the water for the 4th time that week. I thought, quietly, without saying it out loud, I know what this means, and this time, I wasn't afraid of the answer. Chapter 5. Make Me Shut Up. Vincent's house in Hilltop had the kind of silence only old money can buy. I arrived 20 minutes after the scheduled time, not out of strategy, but because I'd spent 10 of them standing in front of the elevator mirror, trying to decide whether that black dress was too short, or whether it was me who wanted to be looked at. I ended up going down in the dress. The guard at the entrance recognized me before I opened my mouth. He just tilted his head and let me through the side gate, as if I were part of a list no one needed to check twice. I crossed the short garden to the main door, and it was Victor who opened it, with that expression of a man who'd seen too many things to be impressed by one more. "Good evening, Miss Cabot." His voice always had the same dry tone. "He's on the terrace." "Thank you, Victor. There are people drinking too much up there." "Good observation." I smiled. "I'll avoid them." He almost smiled back. Almost. I climbed the 3 steps separating the main living room from the glassed-in corridor and followed the low sound of jazz to the open double door. Vincent's terrace took up the entire west side of the house, with a suspended pool in the corner and Denver lit up far below as if someone had spilled a jar of golden lights at the bottom of the valley. I recognized 3 faces. I greeted 2 with a nod. I declined the glass a waiter offered me at the entrance and took a sparkling water. I wanted to be fully present for whatever that night turned out to be. Vincent was on the other side of the terrace, leaning against the low wall, a glass in his hand and his white shirt with the first 2 buttons open. He didn't see me arrive, or pretended not to. It was the kind of thing he did. Wait. I crossed the balcony slowly, greeting whoever needed greeting, and stopped a meter from him. He turned only his head. "You're late." I arrived. 20 minutes late. "I thought it would be polite to give your guests the chance to see you drinking whiskey without me in the corner." He laughed softly against the rim of the glass. "He didn't drink. Come here." "No." He turned his whole body now, leaned his hip against the low wall, and crossed his arms. The white shirt stretched across his shoulders. I pretended not to notice. "Why?" "Because you're used to calling and people coming. And you. I come when it suits me. And does it suit you now?" I looked at the glass in my hand, at the Denver lights behind him, at the way he was looking at me, unhurried, like someone who'd already decided something hours ago and was just waiting for me to arrive to confirm it. Maybe. He uncrossed his arms. "Maybe is the only honest word you've ever said to me. I've said plenty of honest things to you." "You have." He finally drank. A short sip, usually in the form of an insult. "That's my way." "I know." His voice dropped half an octave. "I like it." It was in that second that I understood why I'd spent 20 minutes at the mirror. It wasn't the dress. It was the feeling that I knew exactly where that night was going to end, and that for the first time in 29 years I didn't want to swerve off the route. We stayed quiet for a while. Someone laughed loudly near the pool. Vincent didn't even turn his head. "Your house is too showy," I said, just to break what was starting to break inside me. It was built to impress. On whom does it work? On no one who matters. And on me. He looked at the pool for a second, and when he returned his gaze to my face, something in him had shifted into another gear. "On you. Nothing I try works." Liar. "Is it?" Bringing a white rose to the threshold of my apartment worked. "I didn't bring it. You sent it. I authorized it. That's different. To me, it's the same thing." He set the glass aside. He took half a step toward me. "Rose." "What?" "Stop provoking me." "Why?" "Because I'm trying to be civilized. And what if I don't want you to be?" He stopped. His eyes traveled from my face down to the base of my throat and back. It was quick. It was exact. It was the kind of look that should be illegal on a terrace with guests. I lifted my chin. I didn't know I was going to say it. I'd thought about a lot of things in the elevator, in front of the mirror, in the car. That wasn't on the list. If you don't like what I say, then make me shut up. The air between us grew heavy in a way no one around us noticed. Vincent didn't smile. He didn't sigh. He just took the last step, slowly, as if he were calculating every inch, and stopped so close that I could smell the whiskey on his breath, and with pleasure. His hand rose to my jaw without any hurry at all. His thumb passed beneath my chin, and then he kissed me. It wasn't the kiss of a man in a hurry. It was the kiss of a man who'd waited weeks to do it properly. His mouth found mine with a calm firmness, no desperation, and that was exactly why the floor dropped out from under me. I expected hunger. I got patience. And the patience of a man like Vincent was more dangerous than any urgency. I rested my free hand on his chest, just to confirm I was still standing. I felt his heart beating slowly, steady, the way everything in him worked. Mine, however, was throwing a private party inside my ribs. When he pulled his mouth away, it was only enough for us to still share the same air. "Are you sure?" His voice was almost a whisper. "Because after this I can't go back." I looked at him, at the hard shadow along his jaw, at the way he waited, truly waited, for my answer. No man had ever asked me that. Not in simple conversations, not in small decisions, not even my father, when he decided for all of us what we'd eat for dinner. Vincent Slater, the man all of Denver lowered their eyes to greet, was waiting for me to say yes or no. I didn't answer with words. I just held his gaze long enough for him to understand. He understood. He held out his hand between us, palm up. It wasn't a gesture of possession. It was a gesture of a question. I placed mine over his, and his fingers closed around mine with a firmness that had little of force and much of promise. "Come," he said low. "Not here." We crossed the terrace without anyone looking twice, because Vincent walked with the same authority as always, and I walked beside him with the same poise as always. And from the outside, we were just host and guest leaving the party. On the inside, I'd forgotten how to breathe properly. We went down the glassed-in corridor, passed through the empty main living room, and climbed the dark wooden staircase that led to the upper floor. With every step, I waited for the fear to arrive. I waited for my mother's voice in the kitchen. I waited for the flash of my father raising his voice at dinner. It didn't come. Something else came, a certainty that had no sound. At the top of the stairs, Vincent opened a double oak door and paused to let me go in first. I went in. I heard the door close behind me with a dry, definitive click, the way the right doors close, and then the bedroom fell silent. Morning came through the tall east window with that thin light Denver has at the start of autumn. I woke slowly, with the heavy white sheet over my legs, and the smell of coffee coming from somewhere below me. It took me a few seconds to remember where I was. When I remembered, I felt no hurry to get up. I lay on my side, looking at the high ceiling, counting my breaths until they returned to normal. At some point, I reached out my hand to Vincent's side. The spot was warm, but empty. I got up. His white shirt was folded over the back of the armchair near the bed, as if he'd left it there on purpose. I put it on. The buttons hit me at the middle of my thighs, and the sleeves needed to be rolled twice. I found my reflection in the mirror in the corner and almost laughed. I went down the stairs barefoot. Vincent's kitchen was at the back of the house, with a double-height ceiling and a glass door that opened onto a small interior garden. He was leaning against the marble counter, barefoot, in pajama pants, and nothing on top. There were 2 cups poured. There was a newspaper open to a page he clearly wasn't reading. There was a smell of coffee with cinnamon that I would recognize anywhere in the world. He saw me in the doorway and stopped pretending to read. "Good morning?" "Good morning." "You slept." I did. I crossed the kitchen and took the cup he pushed toward me, like I haven't slept in years. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the cup. He looked at me with his shirt on my shoulders. He looked at the cup again like someone who needed a second to pull himself together. "I don't know how to do this right." His voice was low. No irony, no defense. I took a sip. The coffee was exact. Strong, no sugar, a spoonful of cinnamon. I'd never told him that. No one does. I set the cup on the counter. "Keep trying." He laughed. It was a small laugh, almost a sigh, but it was a laugh. He reached his hand across the counter and touched my fingers with the tips of his, without holding, without trapping, just touched. I didn't move my hand away. His phone vibrated on the marble counter. Vincent looked. His expression changed in 1/100th of a second, the kind of change only someone who'd known him a long time would notice. He answered without turning his face from me. "Victor." I heard Victor's voice on the other end, muffled, fast, no embellishment. Vincent listened in silence. His thumb kept touching mine for a few more seconds, then stopped. "Where?" Another pause. "When?" Victor's last sentence was shorter. Vincent closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he looked at me in a way I couldn't read. "I'm coming down in 10 minutes. He hung up. He set the phone on the counter with the exaggerated care of someone who doesn't want to break anything because he feels like breaking everything. "What is it?" He took a while to answer. He looked at my hand on the cup, at his shirt on my shoulders, at the garden behind the glass. "Hollis is moving pieces." "What pieces?" "The wrong ones." He took a deep breath. "And there are people asking questions they shouldn't be asking." I didn't yet know what it was about, but something in his chest shifted when he said, "Federal prosecutor," and that something crossed the marble counter and settled into my chest too. Vincent came around the counter slowly. He stopped in front of me. He raised his hand, and fixed the collar of his white shirt on my shoulders, as if that gesture were the most natural thing in the world. It was, "Stay. All day? As long as you want." I looked at him, at the shadow along his jaw, at the man who'd waited for my answer the night before he touched my mouth, at the glass of water he'd brought me without my asking, weeks ago, at the door of my building. "I'll stay," I said. "Today." He nodded. He kissed my forehead. It wasn't a goodbye kiss. It was the kiss of a man marking his place to return. He left the kitchen without a sound, the way he did everything. I stayed there, barefoot, with his white shirt falling on my shoulders and the perfect coffee slowly cooling on the marble counter. In that second, with Denver waking through the window and the echo of the word prosecutor still in the air, I understood that I'd entered into something I would no longer know how to leave through the same door, and I understood, with a calm that frightened me more than any fear, that I didn't want to leave. Chapter 6. The Choice in Front of Everyone. Saturday night, the restaurant in Larimer Square was closed to the rest of the city and open only for us. I arrived before Vincent because I wanted to. I wanted to cross the cobblestone sidewalk alone, feel the cool autumn air on my shoulders, decide for myself the pace at which I'd walk through that door. The dress I chose was navy blue, simple enough not to look like I was trying, and elegant enough that no one would doubt I knew where I was. The dining room had been transformed into something between dinner and theater. Round tables in the center, low chandeliers spilling amber light over the white cloth, candles and frosted crystal holders scattered at calculated intervals, and 3 smaller tables along the sides reserved for the guests who wouldn't share the main table. I recognized the work of my own taste in the decoration, the choice of flowers, the way the arrangements were low enough not to interrupt the gazes between guests, the detail of the mirror at the back amplifying the depth of the room. Vincent had asked my team to coordinate. He hadn't told me. I stood for a second just looking at it all, bag on my arm and coat still on my shoulders, before taking off the coat. Arthur Bishop came toward me as soon as he saw me. The elderly consigliere had that kind of elegance that comes from knowing exactly how much each word weighs. The dark suit, the well-cut white hair, the bearing of a man who'd never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. "Miss Cabot, Mr. Bishop, you look stunning. You're lying politely. I appreciate it." He laughed softly, a short, genuine sound I imagine few people had ever heard. He rested his hand on my arm for a second, in a gesture that wasn't familiarity. It was recognition, and went on to receive other guests. Victor passed me right after with a minimal nod, but his gaze lingered half a second longer than necessary to be mere protocol. It seemed, for a second, his version of a bow. I wasn't sure, but I noted the gesture. Vincent arrived 6 minutes later. He crossed the dining room without greeting anyone along the way, not out of rudeness, but because he was the kind of presence that filled a room before any word, and stopped in front of me. The suit was black, the shirt buttoned to the top, and he looked at me with that quiet attention that still disarmed me when I least expected it. He held out his hand. I took it. "Ready? For what exactly?" "To be looked at. Always." He laughed at the corner of his mouth, with that contained humor most people probably never saw, and led me to the main table. It wasn't a theatrical gesture. It was simple, almost domestic, the kind of thing someone does when they no longer need to prove anything. His hand holding mine firmly, the whole room noticing at the same time, 3 heads of the Hollis clan turning slowly at the side tables, making no effort to hide it, taking note of what they were seeing. We sat side by side, not at opposite ends like couples who are still pretending or still measuring distance. Side by side, our shoulders almost touching. Dinner began with a studied calm. Red wine I couldn't identify but knew was good by the smell, and the way Arthur appreciated it without comment. First course, conversations in low tones, the background music discreet enough to fill the silence without dominating it. Arthur made a joke about real estate prices downtown and 2 captains laughed. Victor commented on something about a shipment that had arrived on time for the first time that year, and there was a tone there I couldn't fully read, but I knew enough to smile at the right moment. The provocation came as the main course was served. One of the Hollises at the side table, not Lawrence from the gala, an older man, gray suit, small wet eyes that didn't match the rest of his rigid face, turned his body toward me with that false courtesy you recognize from a distance, because it's too polite for the context and too dry to be real. "Miss Cabot, I hear you organize luxury events." "You heard right. I imagine it's a colorful line of work, dealing with so many types of clients, some more colorful than others, including us, including you, gentlemen." I smiled, slowly, without retreating. The difference is that you pay in full. Vincent didn't turn his head. He kept eating with the same calm as always, his fork moving with a regularity that would have been boring in anyone else, and in him seemed like absolute control. But I felt his free hand rest lightly on my knee beneath the white cloth. It wasn't possession, it was complicity. The man in the gray suit didn't give up. I imagine it's delicate. His voice dropped half an octave, as if a confidence made the insinuation more palatable. A woman alone among so many difficult men. I've never been alone in a room in my life, sir. There's always someone polite. I set the fork down on the edge of the plate with a minimal sound. And when there isn't, I make up for it myself. The whole table stopped chewing for a second. That specific kind of silence that isn't empty. It's total attention disguised as nothing. You're brave. I'm punctual. Bravery is something else. Arthur let out a short laugh at his corner of the table, genuine and unceremonious. Victor laughed too, low, making no effort to hide it. 2 captains joined in. Even one of the younger Hollises at the side tables smiled without meaning to, and was immediately reached by the older one's glare, which corrected him in silence. The whole table had laughed, all but one. Vincent finally turned his head, not toward the man in the gray suit, toward me, and he looked at me with an expression I was still learning to decipher. It wasn't admiration, exactly, nor pride, exactly. It was something that sat between the two and had no ready name. He didn't speak. He just took my hand on the table, in full view of everyone, and brought it to his own face. He kissed the inside of my wrist, once, slowly, with that calculated patience he used, when he wanted me to understand that he was being completely deliberate. For a second, the old version of me wanted to pull back. A public gesture, a man's hand, a full table. For a second, and only that, I didn't pull back. The whole table saw. The Hollises saw. Arthur saw, and this time he smiled for real, with his eyes, with the wrinkles at the corners, with the almost imperceptible tilt of the head that meant something I wouldn't know how to translate but felt as approval. The man in the gray suit went back to his plate in silence. The rest of the dinner passed without incident. Allies talked with allies, advisors talked with advisors, and at some point between dessert, a chocolate fondant I declined, and then ate half of Vincent's, and the coffee, I realized I'd been accepted without anyone needing to say a single word about it. Victor's minimal bow at the entrance had been the whole vote. We left the restaurant near 1 a.m. Larimer Square was almost empty, with that damp gleam wet cobblestones have when they catch the yellow light of the facades. The air was colder than when I'd arrived, and the coat I put back on my shoulders smelled faintly of the room's perfume. Vincent opened the car door for me, waited for me to get in, and came around to his side with that same step as always, the same everywhere, whether with allies, enemies, or no one. In the back seat, with Denver passing by the window in silence and the city lights turning into golden threads against the glass, he spoke first. I claimed you in front of everyone tonight. I looked at him, at the hard profile against the reflection of the storefronts, at the man who'd waited for my answer before he touched my mouth, weeks ago, on the terrace of his house, at the man who served strong coffee with a spoonful of cinnamon without needing to ask. I know. I found his hand on the seat between us, and his fingers closed around mine with a pressure that was neither light nor heavy. I claimed you too. He squeezed my hand once. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We reached Hilltop without exchanging another word, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that's built slowly, brick by brick, between two people still discovering that they don't need to fill every second with sound. We climbed the stairs of the house side by side. We crossed the glassed-in corridor with Denver visible outside through the glass, a screen of cold lights that seemed to belong to a completely different world. Vincent opened the double door to the back balcony, the one facing the whole city below, and let me go first. The cold outside was sharper than I expected. I rested my elbows on the dark stone wall and looked down. Denver had that nighttime way of seeming small, manageable, the size of the palm of a hand, 1,000 lights on, 1,000 windows with people awake for reasons we'd never know, the whole grid of the city glowing quietly as if it didn't know it existed. Vincent came up behind me without hurry. He didn't embrace me immediately. First, he rested both hands on the wall, one on either side of mine, closing a warm enclosure around me without touching me, only the heat of his body arriving before the contact, his breath leveling with mine. Then he rested his chin lightly on my shoulder. Are you at peace? I thought about the question. I thought slowly, the way the question deserved. I thought about my mother in the kitchen, fading little by little inside the silence my father imposed. About my father at the table, deciding for everyone without asking anything. About the promise I made at 15, on my knees in the bathroom, promising myself I would never let that happen to me. About the perfect coffee on the marble counter, strong, no sugar, a spoonful of cinnamon, served by a man who'd never asked how I liked it because he'd paid attention. About the word prosecutor said by Victor on Vincent's phone, and the way Vincent had looked at me afterward, as if he wanted to make sure I was all right before anything else. I thought about the word peace, and how I'd never felt it inside my own body before that exact second, not as the absence of noise, but as the presence of something that had been missing. I am. He lowered one hand from the wall and closed it around my waist, slowly, without force, the way you hold something you don't want to drop, but also don't want to squeeze too hard. I leaned my head back, against his shoulder, and felt his warmth pass through the fabric of the coat. For the smallest fraction of a second, so small that I almost didn't feel it, a question crossed my mind. And if one day I have to choose between loving you and being free? The question came from the old place, the place of the promise at 15, the place of my mother in the kitchen, of the stooped shoulders and the lowered eyes and the life she gave away without realizing it. But Vincent's hand on my waist wasn't holding me prisoner. There was no pressure to stay quiet, to shrink, to fit into a space he'd drawn. It was just there, open, waiting for me to decide to keep being where I was. And I decided. I smiled to myself against his shoulder. The question passed the way a thin cloud passes in front of the moon, quick, weightless, leaving no shadow. It went back where it had come from. I didn't believe it. I rested my head on his chest and felt his breath beat slowly against my temple, regular as something that had always existed. Down below, Denver stayed lit, indifferent, with 1,000 windows of people awake for reasons that would never be ours. The balcony fell silent, and for the first time in my life, the silence didn't seem like something someone was imposing on me. It seemed like something I'd chosen myself.